And that's when companies let researchers go. When software came along and started bringing in agile methods and this like iterative process, research was like, we're not going to slow down product development. We'll speed research up. So they took that linear process and they just tried to condense the line. Rather than change the way they do research, they just changed the time. So rather than we'll just do the line faster. The problem is that doesn't align with how product teams work. When a product team is saying, when you ask a product manager, what do you need to know? They're telling you what they need to know today. So by you doing research, now you're answering the question they need to know today, sometime in the future. And that assumes that product teams stop. This is why researchers have so much consternation about, we don't slow down product development.
In this episode, I chat with Ari Zelmanow, head of user research at Twilio. In this episode, Ari talks about his journey from being a police detective to market research detective, and how the lessons he learned in detective work has informed how he operates research organizations. We discuss the role of research in the business environment and how thinking like a detective could help a researcher be a strong advisor to product and business leadership. Ari also delves into the intricacies of deductive, inductive, and abductive reasoning, highlighting the methodologies behind his work. He draws parallels between detectives, news anchors, hostage negotiators, and researchers, and emphasizes the importance of bringing agility and a sense of urgency and agency to the research role. Let's get started. Welcome to the Way of Product. I'm your host, 𝗀𝗙𝗵𝗏, and this podcast is for product professionals who eventually want to run their own product org one day. The average tenure of a product leader is 2 years, because they fail to make an impact with their teams. I want to figure out how the best product teams and creative technologists tick, with the goal of putting it all into a book. And I want to document the progress and behind the scenes with you as I write it in the coming years. Do you want to get the book for free? Then jump over to 𝗍𝗶𝗭𝗏.com, subscribe to the newsletter, and I'll send you a draft of the book's introduction in a public Google Doc. So if you've benefited from this show, in any way, if you enjoy your work more, you got unblocked from limiting belief, go to 𝗍𝗶𝗭𝗏.com, show some love, and join the newsletter crew. I appreciate it, and I promise to continue to make the show and newsletter more and more valuable as the years go on. Now, let's get back to the good stuff. Thanks for hanging out. Hey listeners, today my guest is Ari Zelmanow. He is the Sherlock Holmes of consumer market behavior. Ari, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Ari, before we get started, how about you share your origin story with the guest? Let them know who you are, what you do, why you do it, and we'll kick off the discussion.
Sure. So I am super passionate about helping businesses make better decisions. I'm a retired police detective turned market detective, but rather than investigating crimes, I now investigate human behavior relating to shopping, buying, and using products. There were 3 skills I learned as a police detective that drove success of cases and put some really evil people behind bars. And to be honest, I was shocked that these skills weren't used in the private sector, despite a clear desire for product and marketing teams to use data to get shit done. So even more amazing was that people entrusted with using evidence from across the business to make decisions never had the right training to develop, present, and defend business cases. And not having these skills has led to some dramatic and necessary outcomes for certain roles, like mass layoffs, lack of impact, highest paid person's opinions, relegation to order takers. The reality is research as a function should be one of the most valuable functions in a business, but it isn't. And researchers, or those who conduct research, should be or act like senior consultants that help the business make more informed and less risky decisions, but they aren't. And so as a researcher who has actually led research, Twitter, Panasonic, Indeed, Quantive, and now Twilio, I know the challenges that businesses face in working with research, and I'm on a mission to change this. And the secret lies in 3 skills: collecting evidence like a detective, reporting insights like a news anchor, and brokering outcomes like a hostage negotiator. And so I help researchers and those who conduct research develop and evolve these skills, because when they do, they become recession-resistant consultants who earn the money and respect of the businesses they serve, and they help the businesses grow, which is what a business wants.
The skill of research often leads people to thinking about Sherlock Holmes. I want to start there. What made Sherlock Holmes, I guess, your spirit fictional character? What about the ethos of that series inspired you to use that as your moniker?
Yeah. So as a fan of detectives growing up, being a police detective was a lifelong dream of mine. I remember, I'm probably going to date myself by saying this, but I remember watching Hill Street Blues as a young child. It was something my parents watched. And then growing up, NYPD Blue, Law and Order, which still continues today. A lot of people are familiar with The Wire, all these great shows about police officers and stuff. And I had read Sherlock Holmes when I was a child. And of course, there's lots of cool quotes and they're snappy, but Sherlock Holmes was a detective that went out and looked for improbable and followed down chase the facts wherever they go. And when you eliminate everything else, whatever remains is the truth. And so that really resonated with me. And as somebody who wanted to bring that branding forward into what I do today, that is the famous detective that everybody knows. And so it just made a lot of sense.
Yeah, and there is a air of magic that comes with Sherlock Holmes, where he's always 2 steps ahead and he makes things look effortless. And I see a lot of parallels. I am a research lead, but I am more of a startup jack of all trades research lead. So like my job title shifts with the needs of the business, but I've always bristled starting my career when people are like, wow, work your magic, or, whoa, you made this look effortless. Next time we'll just do it in 2 weeks instead of 2 months, and I'm always like, no, this is a technical skill. Here's all the frameworks I use. And then I just realized, oh no, people want that. They want the magic. They want Sherlock Holmes. They want to feel like someone has all the answers, even though like in the book, Sherlock Holmes was beating dead bodies to see how long bruising happened and like how long it took to bruise. And he was doing like experiments on the side to like, actually understand, which led to him making everything look effortless. But I think to help with the value and the perceived value, if you make it look like you're Sherlock Holmes, people want that.
The magic in research or researchers isn't in how the sausage is made. It's in the delivery of the insight. It's at the end of Sherlock Holmes or any police movie. It's, and that's how they did it. And yeah,
the big reveal, right?
Yeah, it's totally. And so I think what's interesting also is that research is one of the functions where it's a verb and a noun, right? So the verb of conducting research, I've conducted research since I was in grade school, like I wrote papers, I did investigations, I did all of these things. And then there's the researcher. That is the person who's specially trained to use different methods. And the problem is that there's some blurred lines between those two that create some consternation. And I believe that researchers are threatened by that very idea of democratization, or where everybody can do research. And the problem is in the definition of research. There are really 5 core methods that drive 80% of research. And those are usability testing, desk research, interviews, surveys, and observation. 5 things drive most. Now, sure, what I would tell you is there are spinoffs from those. There's like conjoint analyses. There's Van Westendorp pricing studies. There's all sorts of things that are out there. Those specialized things were like when you're talking about pricing studies, those require some kind of specialized expertise. Conjoint requires some sort of statistical expertise. But the core 5, most people can do them. And saying that they can't creates problems for researchers and the businesses they serve.
What has helped me resolve that concern? Because I've had that concern, right? We're just throwing product managers with no experience doing ethnographic studies or any of the technical sounding research methods. Is that, everyone can play basketball. You're JV, I'm NBA. When it comes to the actual outcomes, right? yeah, everyone can play basketball, but not everyone's going to draw as much attention as LeBron. I'm not
True.
saying I'm LeBron, but I am a pro, right? And so I'm like right bench in the NBA. But the idea is that I'm going to tie back to what you said. Is you could take a person with no research experience, teach them like the frameworks, have them run it, and then take an experienced researcher. But the actual like delivery and outcomes of that work is what is the differentiator.
100%. Problem is,
Yeah.
problem comes from the idea of, I saw it on LinkedIn this morning, somebody giving away like research templates that guide people how to do research. The problem with that is that there's no critical thinking about the problems of like research. They're just following a script. A friend of mine who's a researcher and I were talking yesterday about the difference between a discussion guide and like an interview template. So a discussion guide guides the conversation. A good researcher, a good interviewer knows how to start a conversation and go where it goes and pulls people in to answer the questions and explore the areas of interest. The other way is I'm going to have a list of questions and I'm just going to go through and ask them like a robot regardless. And it's really disjointed, fractured, and it's not as effective. That's the problem with research though, is that although you can teach people the different skills, methods, tools, a lot of times they've got other jobs and things that they need to do also. But I want to pull back to this point that you and I were talking about earlier. And that's, if you're a startup, right? You're a CEO, you're a small team, you started talking to customers, right? And you've built this business. And let's say like at Twitter, when I joined Twitter, Twitter was already well established. They had built their data business, which is the research team that I led, to a $300 million business. And they did that without a researcher. So they were already talking to people, to customers, to other things to get to that point. And that's not an unusual thing for a company to build something up to tens or hundreds of millions of dollars without a researcher. Not without research, verb, noun. How do you reconcile that for those companies where you go in now as a researcher and say, hey, look, you guys don't really know what you're doing. You need an expert when they've already grown it to some level without a research. You're dealing with cognitive dissonance at that point, and that becomes really hard. You're fighting a battle that's really hard to win.
So tell me a little bit more about your time at Twitter. I'm guessing you are that like legit researcher that came in when it was $300 million business. Like, what were like the lessons you learned getting airdropped into that?
What's super remarkable about that is they'd grown that business, and it's a data business. So it was mainly focused on APIs and access to Twitter's data. They didn't even have a designer up to $300 million. They had built a business certainly on product-led growth, probably before product-led growth was a catchphrase.
Yeah.
And my experience was that they were hungry for somebody to come in, but let me make a distinction here. There are two types of researchers too, right? There are surrogates and there are consultants. Surrogates are those that like a company's, I need to do interviews. I want you to go do interviews, bring back the data and insights, and we'll figure out how to apply it. Like, I don't need you I just need you to go do the research, bring it back to me. Then there are consultants. The consultants are those that'll go out on the businesses like, hey, okay, we have this problem we need solved. Can you help us solve this problem? The researcher will go out, they'll connect the insights, facts, evidence, they'll develop a point of view, and they'll come back and connect that to the 5 things the business cares about. Businesses only care about 5 things. They care about growth, they care about value, they care about adaptability, they care about risk, and they care about speed. So let me break them down. Growth, they care about, we want to grow. Every business wants to grow. They want to generate revenue. Value, they want to create value for the business. Now, what happens is that UX and these fields, they conflate what that really means. And they're like, we need to create value for the customers. Yes, you do, but not at the expense of the business. Value for the customers has to lead to value for the business. You and I could sit down today, build an amazing experience for customers that costs the business 10 times more than they make, and the business will go out of business. Adaptability. Businesses want to be able to adapt to conditions like macroeconomic headwinds or COVID. Risk. Every business wants to mitigate risk. They don't want losses to exceed revenue and speed. You see it right now with AI, machine learning, large language models. All these companies have flooded this space trying to be the fastest to generate the best product possible. And you're going to see in 5 years, 3 years, some length of time, consolidation in that space as the winners win. So businesses want those 5 things. Consultants help tie outcomes to those things. So even if they're doing a usability study, they're thinking in terms of the bigger picture. They're more strategic. So at Twitter, going back to your question, this is how I went in there. My experience there was, how can we build a research function that's consultative to the business, helps them continue to grow, but that does some of the function that they need us to do. And I did that there. It was very successful. We did some really interesting work when Twitter was still interested in social good before what it is today.
The company formerly known as Twitter.
Yeah.
It's funny. I was in San Mateo for business, just, for the company I work for. And, I was hanging out with, my boss at the hotel, bar, just retrospecting on the day. And then these 2 guys at the bar were like, starting to talk to us. They were just being friendly. And we asked what they were doing. And they're like, we work for like a wayfinding company. I was actually in town to remove the Twitter sign.
Wow.
Yeah, the guy that got stopped by the police when he was taking down the Twitter sign.
Wow. Yeah. I think that goes to that speaks to one of the problems research solves, though, right? So research on that, you're changing a brand. There's a lot of risk associated with changing a brand. If you're going to change your brand, you should use and leverage research to help understand the implications of that.
Yeah. It actually went through this whole exercise as I rebranded my podcast, is like, how much should I change it? And I opted for a more the recognizable rebrand, where I just removed a word. Design, I was thinking about just changing it entirely, but there's just the concept of like brand equity, like the years of meaning that you put into that name and the work that you put into it.
100%.
Yeah.
And you remember, like, when people anchor you to certain things, like your branding, your positioning lives in the mind of the people who have listened and the consumer. It doesn't, like, we think we're putting something out into the world. When we change something, it's just changed, but it's only changed for us. It's not changed for our listeners, our audience. But when you think about that, you were thinking about it in terms of risk. What kind of loss would I experience if I changed the entire name of my business? And then you think, like, the reality is we think of loss and risk in terms of value. Are we going to lose money or time as a result of a change? And research, both verb and noun, help to mitigate that risk, which is really what the function is. And I think that the research of the future is going to look very different than it does today, because I think that it's going to be employed more strategically.
And so what lessons have you learned as a police detective that have led you to that conclusion?
I think a big lesson is that historically research has operated in a model that more aligns with an academic model than it does.
Yeah, like scientific process.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that is not so you have the scientific process where you'll start with research objectives and questions. You'll go through screening. It's very linear, and academic articles end with publication. Research reports traditionally have ended with publication of a research report or deck that is between probably 30 to 80 or more pages of data and evidence, usually in the same format as an academic article, where you'll talk about, okay, here's our methodology, here's our sampling criteria, here's all of these things. And then when software development came along, so this is market research started that way. Then when software came along and started bringing in agile methods and this like iterative process, research was like, we're not going to slow down product development. We'll speed research up. So they took that linear process and they just tried to condense the line. So rather than change the way they do research, they just changed the time. So rather than we'll just do the line faster. The problem is that doesn't align with how product teams work. When a product team is saying, when you ask a product manager, what do you need to know? They're telling you what they need to know today. So by you doing research, now you're answering the question they need to know today, sometime in the future. And that assumes that product teams stop. This is why researchers have so much consternation about, we don't slow down product development. The reason that we do slow down product development, or product managers wouldn't say it, we don't want to slow down product development. So what I learned as a detective is you need to take an abductive approach. We talked about Sherlock Holmes didn't really use deduction. He used induction, but let's leave that for a second and talk about abduction. Abductive approach to research is building upon a body of knowledge and evidence in real time to help drive something. So as a detective, if you get a call to burglar alarm, you arrive at the house. The first thing you see is the house. Then you look up and you see a broken window. Then you see the doors open. You hear the burglar alarm going off. You go inside and you see that the house has been tossed. It's totally disheveled. You come into contact with the homeowner and they tell you that property is missing. Do you see how we started with just, oh, we got a call for a burglar alarm, which could be like, maybe not, all the way to somebody has been in the house, tossed my house and took property from me. You've built upon a body of knowledge. Research should work that way. And the problem is that researchers, we've been hesitant to do that. We could probably talk about a lot of reasons, but we want to go do research and then deliver the insights. And the insights are here, and that's great. And what I'm suggesting is we should iteratively deliver insights, facts, evidence, a point of view. Yes, attaching some level of certainty to what we know, but it helps businesses make decisions in real time rather than 6 or 8 weeks from now, because businesses don't want to make it. A product team that is looking to make a decision today cannot wait 6 to 8 weeks, because it's not just the product team, the engineering team, it's product marketing, it's all of these things. If they're waiting for evidence or data, they're not going to wait 6 to 8 weeks. They're going to move anyway. And then when they start to move without research, all of a sudden the question becomes, what's the value of research? And that's when companies let researchers go.
You're the first guest. I've been talking to people about abductive reasoning, and every time I tell people, they're like, what's that? And is that made up? And I'm like, no, Google it. It's a real thing. Well, for the listener, I think it might be beneficial to do a quick 101 course on abduction. I think it's a misnomer that Sherlock Holmes was a deductive reasoner. He was an abductive reasoner, and that's what made him so effective, right? But at the end, it looks like he's a deductive reasoner because he talks with so much certainty when he's doing the big reveal at the end. I just want to make sure that they're on the same level as us, before we go forward. Yeah.
So you've heard Sherlock Holmes, and they're like, oh, you've got a power of deduction. It wasn't his powers of induction. Like I said, it's abduction. Deduction is simply the process of taking a principle or rule and then inferring a result in a particular case. I'm going to give you a real world example because that's big words that people are like, what the fuck is that, Ari? Think about this, Daisy Duck. If you took Daisy Duck, put her on a picture, and you said, all ducks are white, Daisy is a duck, therefore Daisy is white. That is deduction. It's always true. If all ducks are white and Daisy is a duck, Daisy has to be white. See how I deduced that Daisy is white from that all ducks are white, okay? Induction starts with surveying data and the case and generalizing across many principles to identify a pattern. So let's use the Daisy, let's stay on Disney, right? You have Daisy is a duck and she's white. Donald is a duck and he is white. And Scrooge is a duck and he is white. Therefore, ducks are white. All ducks are white. So I'll give you an example from when people were in offices. Let's say you go to lunch with your coworkers, right? You go out with 6 of your coworkers and 4 of them order the exact same thing. You would induce that sandwich is probably good because most of them ordered that sandwich. Finally, abduction is thinking in bets. It's like taking information and evidence, weighing the strength of that evidence, and then making decisions based upon it. It's when a major premise is evident, but the minor premise, and therefore the conclusion is only probable. So it'd be like this. Most ducks are white. Daisy is a duck, therefore Daisy is likely white. Now we would need more information. We found a white feather in Daisy's house. Daisy is likely a white duck. Could it be something else? Yes. It could be that Donald was visiting Daisy and left a feather there and Donald was white. but we're saying that Daisy is likely white. And then you're basing that conclusion from the information known at that point in time. It's building a level of certainty or probability towards something that based upon evidence that's happening at the time. That is the difference between the three. Detectives take an abductive approach to things. Think about abduction as building a case. So in our case, in the case that you and I are talking about today, abduction is building a business case for something. You're chasing a story of why something is happening and attaching a likelihood or a level of certainty to that.
Yeah. And so that put another crease in my brain as I'm trying to understand like this topic, that the deduction in Sherlock Holmes. So the whole course of the story, he's doing abductions, and it seems like he's in his head. And I think that's like why he has like the kind of like the partner foil of Watson to just be like, I don't know what this guy's thinking about the whole time. And at the end, he makes a deduction when he needs to like make an accusation as a consultant, right? He needs to actually make a claim that this is what happened. Here's all the evidence I had. And in product, that loop is a little bit faster than the justice system. I think for the sake of justice and making sure the wrong people aren't put away, you get the opportunity to really make sure that you have the evidence. But sometimes in product, and I like this idea that it's just ongoing. And the case is your business. Why should your business be in business? Is probably the case you're working on.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break from our scheduled programming. If you're enjoying this podcast and you've gotten any value out of it so far, I have a special request for you. I'm currently writing a book on product team collaboration, and I want to get the message out there. So if you want to take a moment and hit subscribe in your podcast app, that would mean the world to me, and it would be super helpful in booking better guests, getting better content out there, and getting the message of this book out to more people. So whether you have to pause this podcast or you like multitasking while listening to it, just take a moment and hit subscribe on the show page and show your support. Again, thanks for listening. Now back to the show.
The question of Sherlock Holmes Sherlock Holmes was more inductive than deductive, and definitely, as you mentioned, skewed more toward abduction. But what becomes interesting when you talk about business and evidence and levels of certainty, you have to remember that in the criminal justice system, to convict somebody, there's a burden of proof, and businesses have different burdens of proof also. So I developed this tool that helps businesses evaluate evidence with a certain burden of proof that is good enough for them to move forward. So let's go back to, you asked about criminal justice and how this applies. The burden of proof in a criminal trial is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, I want you to take note that it's not proof beyond any doubt. It's not absolute doubt. It's not absolute certainty. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The reason that's important is businesses shouldn't be looking for certainty either. If the burden of proof to convict somebody and send them away to prison for life is beyond a reasonable doubt, moving forward in business, beyond a reasonable doubt should be good enough. There's also, in civil cases in the United States, a preponderance of the evidence. That's 50% plus one. So that's more likely than not. So what I developed is this tool that when you're evaluating evidence and you're looking at abductive reasoning and building upon that, you have different levels of certainty. And there are really four. There's highly likely, which is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. There's more likely than not, which is a preponderance of the evidence. There's less likely than not, which is 50% minus one. And there's, I'm not certain. So what is cool about that is if you are doing a usability test, right? If you and I are talking about a basic usability test, we did some work with customers. We found that 4 out of the 6 said, we found this usability issue. Would we proceed with that knowing that it might have a lower level of certainty? Let's even say 3 out of 6. It's a low level of certainty. Sure, we might do that because we could A/B test it and we could always roll back a usability test. Conversely, would you make a decision like, should Budweiser make a decision about its brand or Bud Light make a decision about its brand without a high level of certainty when they could lose billions of dollars? No. So you attach a level of certainty to the impact it has on growth, value, adaptability, risk, speed. What's cool about that is it allows you the latitude to build upon a body of knowledge, but ship a decision when you have to ship it, and give yourself the latitude to ship a decision before you're ready sometimes with some evidence, but continue to build upon that body of evidence.
Yeah, well, it's almost like you just say you score what you know so far, and they're like, "What do you think we should do? What does the research say?" And you just take
Exactly.
that score, and it's here's what we know so far, which is a good way to hedge that you're not 100% certain, right? So I
Right.
know this and this, therefore, this is our current conclusion. Now, weighing the decision to ship right now is basically just an exercise in, are we comfortable? Can we live with the potential risks if we're wrong? Or if
Yeah,
that conclusion.
that's right. And what's cool about that is that now you noticed that it's no longer a matter of, oh, product has to wait until the research is done.
Mhm.
Product can start moving while the research is moving, and research can continue to inform product and build upon that body of knowledge. So it's like starting at, if you think like a 5-degree deviation and moving in from 5 to 4 to 3 to 2 to 1, and you're getting more narrow as you're going in time. That is a much more agile process than this linear, hey, we're going to go ahead, we'll develop some research questions, objectives, I'll do some screening, we'll recruit participants. We're going to go do interviews. Yeah, sure. We'll invite you. You can come listen. You can ask questions. But then as soon as that's done, we're going to break into analysis and synthesis. We'll go break that out. And then finally, we're going to deliver some report to you. And the problem with that is you become a delivery person at that point. And when you're a delivery person, you're no longer a partner or consultant. One of the things I say in my course, leading up to my course and stuff, is you could be Bob the Bagel Guy or Michelle the McKinsey consultant. Bob the Bagel Guy delivers bagels. The only question Bob's going to get asked at the beginning of the day is, hey, what's good today? Sesame? Great. I'll take sesame. Michelle, the McKinsey consultant, hey, we're having problems in the business. What do we do with it? And people are going to listen to Michelle as she talks about the things that you can do to fix growth, value, adaptability, risk, speed. Researchers need to be Michelle, the McKinsey consultant, not Bob the Bagel Guy. We don't need them delivering. We need them consulting.
Yeah, we just need to be the keeper of the evidence and be able to groom and make sure that the repository of evidence is consumable, right? And so I've come to that conclusion too. I don't write research reports anymore. I'm sure you're familiar with Teresa Torres's Continuous Discovery Habits
Yep.
book. And I tried that out where it's, instead of coming up with some research report with very like obscure, inaccessible sources, right? Of that they're basically, it's your word or they don't trust your word at that point. So I did this customer tour in Mexico, interviewed a bunch of customers in Mexico for a company I work for. And the output was these interview snapshots, which were just like summary bullets of the interviews. And so no conclusions, just observations, the abductive reasonings. Okay, I noticed this. I thought this was interesting about how he said this. Put some pull quotes of the most interesting quotes, right, in the interview. But it's like you start at the same level, right? And you show this to them. And here's all the summaries of the interviews. These are all the most interesting quotes. Here's links to the quote, that point in the interview. Like I have the video, the interview recordings linked to it. But there's no conclusions. Like I'm not making a recommendation. I'm like, okay, cool. Let's go through this together. And I consult them through the process of, oh, why do you think they said that's interesting? Someone said a very similar thing over here. And we started developing like a premise. And then we came to this insight after going through the evidence. We were able to make these connections in like the database of like customer relationships. And so I did that. The CTO is like, oh, fuck, that's super compelling. That's super interesting.
Right.
The 𝗵𝗂 moment. He goes to the CEO and is, you need to talk to Caden. And so there's no reason for me to talk to the CEO, but the CEO is like trying to figure out like the business strategy and reinvent like where we're going to go. And he asked me, tell me more about this. And I started telling him the story. And at the end of it, he's just like, so do you believe that is what we should do? Is that what the customer really wants? And I'm like, well, I'm confident because that's how they behave today. They're doing workarounds to behave this way. Like we're not telling them to act this way. They're acting this way. And so the current evidence shows that they want to do it this way. And over the last course of the year, our whole business has been like reinvented around that premise of, no, I just observed that there is a pretty consistent pattern of behavior that goes outside how we currently designed and marketed the product. So there's something there. That's all the confidence I have. And we went forward, tested it out, and the business did pretty good. We're growing 100% year over year. And so,
So it's interesting. What I developed is this idea of a top line report. And we've all heard top line before. And so maybe I probably need
Yeah.
to come up with it. But top line
Yeah.
it's not a report, it's a news structure. So
Yeah.
if I'm thinking of research as we deliver like research reports and we collect evidence, I think of us as a news organization. We deliver news that gives the teams information they need to make better growth decisions today. So with the top line reports, we deliver points of view, insights, and facts similar to what you did, but in real time based upon the strength of the evidence that we have. One thing you said that I think is a really cool distinction, and it ties back to what we were talking about research and this idea of who should be doing research, is researchers can collect evidence and be like be the only ones that collect evidence, or researchers can interrogate the evidence that's collected, meaning that we accept that other people are going to collect evidence, but we're the experts in interrogating that, which goes back to what you said about we were talking about, but detectives. It'd be like us being outside, you, me, a group of people, and in that group, there are some detectives, and something happens. Would you only take a statement about what happened from the detectives, or would you take a statement about what happened from everybody, but then weigh the evidence based upon what you're hearing from everybody, considering that the detectives are trained observers and their statement you might put more weight on? That's what happened in businesses. Like you have customer success gathering data from customer conversations. You have sales conversations. You have NPS, you have CSAT, you have usability testing, you have all sorts of data sources within a business. Do we just ignore those data sources because the researcher didn't drive those? Or do we, wait a second, let me see how customer success's data and evidence ties into the broader story, weigh that and build a point of view, insights, or facts that ground on that.
You know, what I love about that is that it's a great way to tie like the news organization and how you explained how the detectives aren't there to give a statement. They're there to analyze the evidence, and their deliverable is a recommendation to the prosecutor, right? And in a news organization, the writer, there's a whole team of like staff writers, but it's the editor who does the editorial that decides what makes it into the cut for that release, right?
Yeah.
And so like a detective and a news editor and a researcher at a product company are really like editorial of all the data sources, and then using frameworks to make sense of the information so that they can provide actionable recommendations as they go, instead of being the actual one, oh, well, I wrote the article or whatever. And this actually ties with another guest where he was talking about thinking in bets. It was the CEO of 𝗵𝗵𝗹, which is like a digital business card company. And he was talking about how he leans heavily on the sales calls, and he actually has him CC'd in all the sales emails so that he could see the incoming, get all the evidence of the customer conversations. That you're giving me a ton of ideas on how I could take this to work right now. Is just the fact that, oh no, I don't need to conduct all the research studies. I just need to basically pipe in all the different sources of information for the people that meet our customers every day.
Correct. And
Yes.
think about this.
Yeah.
The reality is this. I'm going to tell you where Wayne Gretzky has a famous quote. I don't go to where the puck is. I go to where the puck's going. I'm going to tell you where the puck is going in research. Recruitment of participants is getting increasingly more difficult. Recruitment of participants, meaning like any participant recruitment, is hard. There is an influx of bad participants, people taking like fraudulently signing up for studies, which has always been a problem, but I think it's increasing. And I'm seeing that even customers we're experiencing some kind of feedback fatigue. And I think it's going to continue to get worse. So why this is so important is the good researcher of the future is not going to be thinking in terms of only primary research. They're going to be thinking of what data, what evidence do I have available? And how can I use that evidence to build my story to sell to my editor or executive producer that we can go to press with? Meaning that like the other point I'll make to you is this: news organizations, I don't want to talk about like the bullshit fake news organizations today, but like
The idealized.
yes. The idealized news organization didn't go to press without validation or triangulation in research, corroboration in detective work, some sort of, are we certain that what we're going to press with is real? So they would corroborate and then they would go to press. And what's cool, think about a headline news, right? So let's say today something happens in your business and you have a low level of certainty with it. Would a news organization not report something because they don't have a high level of certainty? Or they break the news because they have some corroboration and they'll continue to evolve that story over time. So if you think about any breaking news story, we don't have a lot of information, but this is what we know. We know a little bit more now. We've talked to this source. We've talked to this source. We know even more now. And they keep building that level of certainty over time. What's cool is when you do that, when you follow that path, a product manager can be like, okay, I've got this information today. Oh, cool. We've got new information coming in, and they can pivot and modify as they go. They can update their PRD. Marketers can change their marketing strategy. All of this can happen in real time. And the reality is that more data and information and evidence is coming in than ever before. The job of the researcher doesn't need to be to collect that information. We have lots of tools that can collect it faster and good enough. Our job is to interrogate it, build the story, tell the story in a time that the business can do something with it.
Yeah, one experiment I had, I'm still running it when I have time to do it, is I have a Slack channel where I invite like all the leadership and all the different people that want to join, right? You market it like, hey, if you want to be part of this news feed, I'm just going to share like little bits of information as I'm learning it. And I'll send links to Dovetail and be like, hey, I just was in an interview. I thought this was really interesting. And then it leads to thread discussion about that one data point. But it's not like a huge, like broad overarching conclusion. So, oh no, here's some more evidence. This is my thoughts about it. Yeah.
But I think in my course, what I teach people is if you have a point of view, you can deliver so that we use these levels of certainty. We color coded them. So if you were like, okay, we're learning, this is why it matters, and this is what I think it means, you can still deliver that. The cool thing about news is that as you get more information, researchers, probably goes back to the academic thing, we don't want to be wrong. We're afraid that being wrong is going to blow back and reflect on us. But the reality is, it's okay for us to
communicate uncertainty.
Yeah. And be wrong. It's okay for you to say, this is what we thought before. This is what we've learned. This is what we think now. But the cool thing is researchers, I teach this in my course. There are 3 types of like arguments. There's arguments of blame, there's arguments of value, and there's arguments of decisions. As researchers, it's your job to get people focused on arguments of decisions. Let me give you a real world example. Caden, why did you leave the toilet seat up? That is an argument of blame. That is me saying like, why did you do something? Ready? In research, Caden, why did you only interview 10 people? Your justification of that is now focused on why you made a decision about something. That even if you're never going to come to a term where you're going to convince your stakeholders, your group, that's okay. The second one is, Caden, what kind of person leaves the toilet seat up? Or in research, Caden, what kind of person doesn't validate qualitative methods with something else? What kind of person isn't going to do a survey of a couple hundred people before we make this call? That's a value argument. Value arguments never go anywhere. Think about how are you going to convince somebody who's already set in their mind that quant is better than qual? The third argument is arguments of decision. Okay, Caden, what are we going to do in the future to get you to put the toilet seat down? Ready? In research, cool. Caden, with what you've delivered today, what are we going to do? What are the next steps? And you see how the third one isn't arguing about how the sausage is made or why you made the decisions you did, which you made because you're the expert in research to begin with. Like you don't ask your doctor, hey, why did you do an EKG?
How did you come to that conclusion?
Yeah, like we don't do that. We trust the physician to have made the call because they're an expert. This takes the decision and says, hey, this is what we've done. This is the evidence we've gathered. This is our level of certainty. What are we going to do with it in the future? And what I found at Twilio and other places where I've used this method is that it rightly focuses everything on what are we going to do with what we learned. And it assumes that the researcher is the expert in research, the methods, the collection tools, how we got there. If you had for example, let's say you and I were running a study. We have 3 weeks to do it. We recruit people. We have a terrible time with recruitment. So we have to pivot the method to get good enough. That's our call. We're the experts in doing that. We know what the time frame is, the time horizon is. Arguing about how we got there, it's with people who aren't educated. You ask product managers, how did you cut? Why did you build the PRD this way? What kind of product manager builds a PRD that's only 3 pages long? Do you see how that nobody does that to product managers or designers?
Yeah, and I think like they have like their own versions. So this is, I think we're transitioning into the hostage negotiation part
Yeah.
of your pitch, right? Now, in the hostage, it sounds like is the deliverable. Hey, release the hostage. Just focus on getting what you want, not like about like they're holding your work hostage because they're afraid of something or they have some agenda, right? This is what I'm hearing from you.
Yeah, I think that when we talk about brokering outcomes like a hostage negotiator, the problem with a lot of times when we're delivering insights or when designers are delivering something or product managers are delivering something, we think of the negotiations within the business as like buying a car, where you want to buy a car for 10,000, the car dealership wants to sell it for 20,000, and there's some sweet spot between, but it's very adversarial, right?
Yeah, it's a zero sum game. There has to be a loser.
Yeah. But in business, you and the product manager both want the same thing. You want growth, value, adaptability, risk, speed. So you need to move yourself from two sides of the table, the same side, and work toward the same, toward the outcome that's best suited. Everybody wants the same thing in business. We all want to win. How we're going to get there is what matters. And so that is like brokering the outcomes like a hostage negotiator. And as a researcher, it's our job to keep people rightly focused on like arguments of decision and brokering those outcomes, working together to negotiate a best alternative, like the best possible outcome with the evidence that we've had within the context that we've had it. Now, it's important to note that it is okay for researchers should never be going off and just, I talk about this and I say, you should deliver your point of view and you should deliver insights and facts. That stuff doesn't occur in a vacuum. When you're delivering the news, the headline news, you're actually taking stakeholders along for the ride because they know what we're talking about the whole time. And by delivering headline news, you're giving them the latitude to develop and define their own opinions, thoughts on something so that you can come to a negotiated outcome.
And you give them like a sense of agency. I think there's nothing worse than a researcher saying, no, this is how you should think about it. And they don't take you along the journey to get you there on your own.
Agreed. I think that it's important that a researcher, you want to allow people the ability to come to conclusions on their own, but you want to develop insights, points of views, and facts in a way that people consume it. And the reality is, if you think about the way you, I, any other human consumes information today, we're a scroll world. We look at headline, go read news. You'll scroll headlines. You'll find a headline. You'll click on it. You might read first paragraph or first two. You might
the lead.
Yeah, the lead. And don't bury the lead. So that's something I teach in my class also. Don't bury the lead. Top line news reports are no more than 6 pages long, ever. But we always we always use provenance. We always attribute to sources that people who want to go deeper can go deeper, but that you're not forced to. So as a designer or product manager, you can read the things that you think are most valuable. The lead, you can read the lead. You can read the key, most pertinent evidence. And then as an executive, that might be enough. If you're a designer that's working on something, you might want to go deeper, but it meets everybody where they're at in their data, relative to the data and the journey they're in.
And that seems like a more infinite way to run a research org instead of being like an agency model where you're there just for the length of the project. You're there for as long as you are working on the business, so like you need to be able to stay in the game and not, and be able to, basically just build on a continuing body of evidence and then make it accessible so people can come to their own conclusions. And if they're not confident in the risk, go to you and be like, hey, with what I know, I don't feel like I'm ready to ship this. Okay, cool. Let me do some more research to see if we can make this more high fidelity.
And when you think about that agency model, like where that works, where I believe in strategic research strongly, as we can tell from this conversation, but I also recognize that sometimes some businesses need surrogates. They need more data than they have today. And so they'll hire a supplier side firm to come in and do surrogate research. The internal researcher should treat that like another data source. Like use that, but then build the story from other sources and evidence. So to your point, like I think it's okay to build it like a newsroom, build it,
Yeah, just
build
build
the
like a
story.
newsroom, which, I actually paid my way through college working for a newspaper and for the school newspaper. And just the lessons I've learned working in that space is it applies to like most, I would say, org structures. If like we understood that, hey, we have an accountability to the people around us, our audience, to communicate a level of certainty. If we're not certain, communicate that's not certain. I think like where the news fails, right, is when they say everything with certainty. And their audience, this is the CNN Fox
Yeah.
scenario. Everything, they say everything with certainty, even though the evidence doesn't lead to that conclusion. And so the kind of level of like stewardship of a news organization or even like a research organization or even a design or product management organization is, because we all suffer this problem of just over communicating certainty when we've talked to one customer, right? And saying, hey, this is what I know right now. I'm comfortable with the risks. I'm willing to be wrong. I don't think like the downside of us making this call with what little we have is going to be bad enough. It's going to blow us out of the water. But then it's saying, hey, I don't feel confident enough to make this decision. Let's make this information more high fidelity. Like that, the conversation about, hey, do we accept the risk? Yes or no? If yes, okay, ship it. If no, do more research. And that's the conversation rather than.
Agreed. I think that the other issue is with Fox and CNN is that they're entertainment organizations that say they're news organizations. And I do believe that there are blurred. I did a study at Twitter early on about news and
Yeah,
entertainment.
definitely.
And we found that there were blurred lines between the two, that people like use the news for entertainment. Makes sense. But I think in terms of research teams, we need to be like, we need to be very ethical about the way that we deliver those things, which is why we attach a level of certainty to all our facts, insights, and points of view. So we can say, hey, this is what we're seeing. I want to tell you what I'm seeing, but I'm not very certain about it, which is okay. It's okay to not be certain about something. And it's also okay to be like, hey, we are very certain about this. And when you have very certain things, many times when you have a high level of certainty about something, it's because you've got lots of attributable sources. Like, yes, we did interviews, we've got a survey, we've got prior research that ties into this. And tying all of those things together helps you build that high level of certainty. And what I found using that kind of method is that there are very few conversations. In fact, I could say there have been zero conversations about the evidence, the report, and it's always more about what are we going to do with what we've learned today. And sometimes that is, we have some gaps that we're unsure of. Maybe those are future stories to chase down. I think I see researchers more as investigative reporters and detectives than I do academic researchers who are going out, doing a study and delivering that. I want them to move the business forward with the headline news that's important today.
I don't know how we did it, Ari, but I think we've checked every box of what you do at a high level. Is there anything in this conversation you feel like has been left unsaid? And so I'm going to give you this moment just to tie some loose ends before we sign off. And then also, how could listeners find your course and your material and where to find you?
Yeah. So I think the thing I would tell you is this: the job of a researcher isn't to just deliver data. It's not to just deliver insights. It's to provide counsel through a clear, compelling point of view. It's to be the consigliere to the business. So if you've seen The Godfather, it's Tom Hagen to Don Corleone. Or if you like Game of Thrones, it's the right hand to the king or queen, and the advice they give to drive the business forward as business tries to experience predictable growth, increase value for the business, adapt to unpredictable change, mitigate risk to minimize losses, and move faster than the competition. I also would tell you again that it is your job as a researcher or person who conducts research, whether you're a product marketer, a product manager, somebody who is using research, evidence, let's use evidence to make decisions, that it's your job to turn that evidence or data into stories into strategies, and strategies into outcomes. And when you do that, you're going to find that your career takes off like never before, and the businesses you work for will be wildly more successful. And finally, what I will tell you is that I'm going to make a shameless plug for the two things that I offer here. One is the Influential Researcher. It's a course that is designed to help researchers and those who conduct researchers be seen as trusted advisors to business leadership. It is a Maven course. You can sign up for information about that course at influentialresearcher.com. And when you go to that page, you will also get a free communication framework. And the other thing I would tell you is I'm poking at this idea of a program that helps researchers build a news organization. So it is basically a function of, it's called Not Uncertain, and it's how to build a silo-busting, insights-delivering, intelligence-gathering, odds-shifting news organization for your business to help them make better decisions about that today. You can learn more about the progress of that project by following me on LinkedIn or signing up for my email list at arizelmanow.com. And thank you so much, Caden. This has been just absolutely awesome.
It feels validating that like the Sherlock Holmes in the industry of consumer market behavior validated all my awkward conversations talking about abductive reasoning. And I'm like, okay, cool. I'm not the only one that's like saying it online. So that it feels great. So thank you so much for providing so much value, over delivering on value than you needed to in a podcast. It says a lot about your character. I recommend anyone learning how to be a better researcher should, look Ari up on LinkedIn and consume his stuff. Ari, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much, Caden. I appreciate it.
Hey, listener, thanks again for listening to The Way of Product. As we power down today's session on the fusion of creativity and technology, let's solidify the energy you've gotten from our dialogue today. If you've gleaned insights or strategies that could turbocharge your projects, I have a small but powerful ask. Swing by the platform where you're hearing this and leave a review. Think of it as your digital high five to us. It's a fuel that propels this content to more creative technologists like you, amplifying the impact of the shared knowledge. So until our next interview, keep pioneering and pushing the envelope. Thanks again for lending your ears and your imagination to our community. Catch you on the next download. Is everyone gone yet? Because this next offer is for you. And this is because you listened all the way to the end of this episode. Today's episode is sponsored by 𝗀𝗏𝗻, a name you might not be familiar with yet, but one you'll definitely want to remember. I don't know about you, but most meetings are terrible. Long circular discussions, weeks with no progress. I was tired of that. Tired of good energy getting sucked out of potentially explosive creative sessions. So I finally decided to do something about it. That's why I started 𝗀𝗏𝗻. Think of 𝗀𝗏𝗻 as a special ops for team collaboration. We're the ones you call for remote or on-site workshops where you need to get your product team aligned and moving without the usual drag. No more endless circles or feeling like you're herding cats. I've been there. I've been stuck in the muck of misalignment, watching the clock while creativity just fizzles out. That's not how breakthroughs happen. 𝗀𝗏𝗻 workshops are built differently. They are the cure to the common meeting. And because I believe in the power of what we're doing, I'm offering something special to Way of Product listeners. If your team's feeling stuck, let's talk. I'm opening my calendar for free 25-minute coaching calls to audit your team's collaboration issues. We'll dissect the problem areas, and I'll share techniques and tactics tailored to your situation to help you get unblocked and back in the flow. Think of it as a turbo boost for your team's productivity. So here's what you do. Visit wayofproduct.com/workshops. Get all the details, sign up for your free coaching call, and let's start turning those meeting groans into high fives. All right. Thanks for listening to the full episode. And remember, with 𝗀𝗏𝗻, it's not just a meeting, it's a turning point. Talk to you soon.